I think we are indeed facing today, in the current times, a crisis of multilateralism. As ITUC, we firmly disagree with that. The question is not whether multilateralism is needed. No, I think we need even more multilateralism.
We make time also to have an exchange and discussion on a matter that is not minor for social partners and social dialogue. And this matter has to do with multilateralism. When we talk about multilateralism, we talk about international organizations. The problem is not the absence of rules, isn't it? It's more the lack of implementation of the rules. I would have liked the UN system and the ILO to have more teeth to avoid that situation, isn't it?
We need to be clear on that point, whether it's a company leader or whether it's a worker, that this is not acceptable.
Well, thank you, Luke. Luke Triangle, Secretary General of the International Trade Union Organization, the main social partner, the main trade union.
Yeah.
Here, welcome to the IOE.
Thank you for the invitation, Roberto.
Thank you very much also for making the effort. Also, I know that you have a very heavy schedule also, but we make time also to have an exchange and discussion on a matter that is not minor for social partners and social dialogue. And this matter has to do with multilateralism. When we talk about multilateralism, we talk about international organizations. Of course, the International Labour Organization is our home, let's put it like that. I mean, it's an organization that is founded in tripartism. It's not that we are observers. We co-decide together what are the decisions taken by this organization, by the ILO. But when we talk about multilateralism, we go beyond that. Okay, we talk about the UN system, the institutions that were created after the Second World War, but also after the First World War, and why this is important for business and why this is important for employers. So perhaps we can start the conversation having your say in terms of how you see the world evolving in terms of this international scene. I mean, now we're in the middle of a crisis. Perhaps this crisis will end soon, perhaps not, and there could be, there is a conflict in the Gulf region, but that can escalate worldwide, and how this affects also the international scene, and how this affects also the multilateral system. So let's start this conversation having your views, and I will give you mine,
Sure.
And from there we'll go to multilateralism if you find that appropriate. Okay.
Yeah. No, thank you very much, Roberto, and thank you very much, IOE, for inviting me. I appreciate it very much. I think we are indeed facing today, in the current times, a crisis of multilateralism. It is identified as maybe not efficient, not needed, and so on. And obviously, as ITUC, we firmly disagree with that because multilateralism and the multilateral institutions, and you said it already, most of them have been created just after the Second World War, and with a certain purpose, because the world needed at that time platforms at international level, at global level, where the world came together and comes together to dialogue in different fields, but also more general politically in the United Nations. And I think that has proven its effectiveness over the last decades. Multilateralism has worked and delivered on many conflicts. Obviously, we also experienced over the last years a number of weaknesses of multilateralism, where multilateralism maybe needs to have some reform. When I talk about United Nations, I think that the calls from the Global South today to be more involved in the real decision-making, and I'm talking, for instance, about the Security Council in the UN, is a valid request they have. We also see that the veto right in the Security Council in the UN is maybe up to review, because it is used often now and blocks a lot of decisions that need to be taken in the UN context and at global level. But overall, and certainly in the current crisis in which we are now since a couple of years, and certainly also the last months, the question is not whether multilateralism is needed. No, I think we need even more multilateralism. Multilateral institutions are extremely important today to dialogue, to have exchange between opinions and to come to consensus. And in that sense, our opinion is clear. We need more multilateralism today and not less multilateralism. But some of the multilateral institutions might need to be reformed to a certain extent. But the point that we want to make is it's not about less multilateralism. Multilateralism is more than ever needed today.
Yes, but let me also put myself on the shoes of those who are very critical with the multilateralism and how it has worked recently. Okay, the sense of reality, the sense of they need to be close to individuals, to society, to employers, to workers. I mean, let's put the ILO aside. Okay, don't you think that it has lagging behind? I mean, that many of these UN institutions, not all of them, of course, first of all, are very slow in the terms of taking decisions. Of course, you can tell to me, okay, there is a, having consensus on all these organizations is really difficult. But at the same time, when you need agility, quick reactions, to strengthen, the rule of law, or to strengthen the scenario for peace, the UN system and some international organizations are still too bureaucratic, too procedural, and sometimes we see many initiatives coming, new initiatives coming and flourishing, whereas there's much overlapping. You don't know who is doing what. You don't see the practical sense of.
No, but I do agree that we need to evaluate what we have today. There are many multilateral institutions, many of them under the umbrella of the UN, but also other organizations that are in the sideline of the UN. And you don't hear me saying that we shouldn't tackle overlap and we shouldn't look into efficiency. So in that sense, the UN 80 process and the reform program comes at the right moment. But what cannot be questioned is the need for multilateral institutions. Because today what we see are actually, first of all, the non-respect of international law. International law is often, certainly with the recent wars, completely sidelined, fully violated. And we see indeed a Security Council that is not able to act on that because there is always the veto of one of the key countries. So that does not work. I fully agree on that. But on the other hand, we cannot go to another system which is based on the law of the strongest. And that's what's happening today. Who has the most military power? He or that country then defines what's happening in the world. And we have seen that in the last weeks and months. And honestly, Roberto, this is bad for workers, this is bad for civilians, but it's certainly also bad for companies, because today companies are acting in a very volatile environment. Today it's white, tomorrow it's maybe gray, and the day after it's black, and then it goes back to white. So this kind of uncertainty is not good for anyone, and certainly not for a business environment as well. So I think in the interest of both sides and also of society, and including civilians and workers, we need to go back to a kind of a rule of law. And the rule of law is today indeed not respected. So in that sense, we do have a common agenda. I don't see any opposing agenda between our two organizations, because you need to have stability for your companies to function. That's what they want. They want to have clear standards and transparent rules. And that's also good for jobs, and that's also good for workers and for people, because then jobs can be created in sustainable companies. And and people feel safe. So today we don't have not much of that. We see that with the energy prices, we see that with wars popping up, and wars where it's not always clear what is really the objective here. So all that is actually, in my opinion, quite new. We have not seen that so much in the last decades, what's happening today in the world.
I think you're totally right when you say that for business, rule of law, certainty. I
Yeah.
mean, if you ask anyone, a small, medium company, big company, what's your main expectations? Normally they say, I want certainty. Tell me what are the rules.
Yeah,
And,
sure.
and I will fulfill, but you cannot change the rules every day, or that's what kills business. Of course, you have other elements that are jeopardizing also the capacity to grow, but the lack of certainty and multilateralism can help also to create a.
Yeah.
So we have been very clear, and also with you and with others, that if there is a questioning now of what does it mean, we are clear that and we are determined also to defend multilateralism. At the same time, I have to say that that's our perspective, and you can share it or not. Sometimes it's difficult for us to say what is the daily life or daily concerns of a businesswoman, businessman who's setting up their business. How difficult it is to deal with weak institutions at national, domestic level. How difficult it is to deal with corruption, with high informality, and sometimes how difficult it is to deal with all these regulations that are not precisely helping them to move, to grow, but also to create decent jobs, but also to as the Secretary General of the UN says, to do the right thing, whatever that means. But this kind of language of saying, of having someone very vocally saying at the international system, in the UN, in the different organizations, saying, listen, many of the proposals that you are suggesting us are good, but they are not integrating my perspective. They are not integrating these concerns that I have as business. There is something true there. At least that's how I feel that. I don't know whether on your side you share this or you have a different approach.
Well, we are both acting at the global level. I think the situation is a little bit different from country to country and from region to region. First of all, obviously, companies need to have a stable environment, a stable investment environment. And what does that mean? Obviously, clear rules, transparent rules, rules that are not changing every day or every week or every month. An environment of non-corruption. So I think all that I support. So that's also a society. Then, if you can deliver that as a society, where it's also not only limited to creating the right business environment with clear, transparent rules, but often also linked then to rules on working conditions, on labor standards, etc. So I don't say that it always goes hand in hand, let's be clear, but I think it's clearly that in many countries this goes hand in hand with also working conditions and labor standards. So in that sense, we understand that and we support it because when you talk about companies' environment, obviously you also have countries where there are no rules or little rules, and where you can go as a company and you can say, okay, we invest here, and when you see what you need to do to function there and to deliver production there, there are not much standards. Well, these countries are often then also countries where you have corruption, where you don't have rule of law always guaranteed, where you don't have respect for working conditions, trade union rights, and so on. So in that sense, there is a link between having a good, stable, correct business environment and also having respect for labor standards and trade union rights. So often they go together.
No, it's true. I mean, but perhaps, I think that you and I agree on that. In some countries, the problem is not the absence of rules, isn't it? It's more the lack of implementation of the rules. I mean, again, we go to the idea, to the data of 60% of the total occupied population in the world are in the informal sector.
Yeah,
that's a big problem. And I'm not sure the international, again, going back to the multilateralism, they are integrated this fact or we are integrating, because we have also a co-responsibility, as we should. At the end of the day, is very often our implementation of having rules that are implementable, isn't it? Because you can have the regulation, if I may mention a country of Norway, but you cannot apply this regulation to a country that is developing or is weak, etc. So there is a set, and this kind of conversation also is important to have in the multilateral. But agree that we need institutions to help both employers and workers and employers. But don't you think also that this informality discussion on how we deal with the informal sector, the lack of rules or the lack of implementation of rules is more needed than ever now?
Well, it's also, I think, important to look where we do have most informality. If 60% of the workforce, and these are the ILO numbers, and we agree on those, 60% of the current workers are in the informal economy, and in the informal sector where there is no rule, where there is no coverage of social protection. 1 on 2 workers in the world doesn't not have any kind of social protection. Well, where does that happen? Well, that happens often in regions and in countries where you have what I call failed states. You have a state, you have a government, but you deal with corruption, you deal with no rule of law, you deal with actually a government which is not strong enough in the country to implement legislation, to enforce legislation, as well for companies, but also for workers. And that's where you have then the growth of informality, because it's not sanctioned, it's not looked after by these countries, and then you have this kind of evolution. But obviously what we have seen now in the last 10, 15 years is a growth of informality also in, I would say, more advanced economies, with platform economy and others. We know the topic, and that's also what we have seen, that this informality is growing in that sector. But what I think, Roberto, is where our responsibility is looking after how can we enforce social dialogue in that context. So I think we are social dialogue partners. That means we do not always have to agree on everything. That would be a little bit too optimistic that we should agree on everything, but at least we need to have the structures also in countries available and in regions available to develop social dialogue. And social dialogue for us is really crucial. We are big supporters and promoters of social dialogue. And that means that we need to have counterpartners to dialogue with. That means we are, in fact, in favor of having strong employers' organizations in countries that represent the employers in the country. And the same for our side, that we have indeed trade unions that represent workers in the country and that can be a counterpart for employers. Because it's through social dialogue that you can also deliver results which are maybe not always met by countries. Yeah. So we play a role together with countries, but we also play a role on our own. And so in that sense, I think social dialogue is also a joint responsibility, that even in countries where you have weak governmental structures, where you don't have a strong government to deliver to companies or to workers, that's where our role comes in, and where our organizations can play a role in those countries.
And that's sometimes what the international organization doesn't integrate properly, I would say, okay? That you need independent, and I would you refer to the strong, solid employers and business organizations and workers organizations. That doesn't mean, for me, to be strong mean to be professional, but also to be independent. Mm-hmm. And that's not a given, isn't it? I mean, it's very often the case that you have organizations, yes, that represent or trade unions or worker or employers, but this independence is not there, or is not easy. And that deals also with another topic which is also connected to multilateralism, which is freedom of association, okay? Mm-hmm. And how do we see that evolving? I mean, we have been discussing that precisely now, some minutes ago, within our own ranks, and how freedom of association is evolving, also for business. And it's very interesting to see how the agenda of a trade union movement and also an employer organization is converging on that point. We are far away from agreeing, and also we are not shy, not you, not me, not our members. But if there is an area where we have a common understanding is when an organization is intimidated, threatened, because of being what it is, because of saying what is need to be said, or what the opinion is, we should, I mean, beyond political discussions at the national level, we should be on the same page. And that's where we need multilateralism. ILO helps us, but we will need also other UN international bodies also to help in that direction, which is not always the case, I have to say.
No, I agree. That means that it's also in the constitution of the ITUC that we only affiliate what we call independent trade unions, so representative, democratically structured, so an independent indeed from governmental influence and so on. However, honestly, tells me that I have to tell you that it's not always easy, because the reality coming from a European country, Roberto, if you then go into countries that were 30 years ago or 35 years ago still communist countries, going from there then even 35 years later to fully independent countries where you still have a lot of influence of the past in the way how the country is organized politically, how it's working with elections, etc. It's not always easy, but obviously we need to be clear that our organizations need to be independent from politics, need to be independent from a government, and need to have free hands to do social dialogue and to do their work, to organize companies for your organization, and to organize in a free and democratic and not dangerous way to organize workers without ending up in jail. So we also have the cases, you know them, where workers, representatives end up in jail because they do their work as trade unionists, and they are sanctioned, and they are now for years already in jail. We still have these examples. So all that should be condemned, as well as we should also push that employers' organizations need to be able to organize companies and employers. So and this in a way that it's not threatened, that you're not threatened as organization locally in the country to do that.
So, and that's a very good point, Luke, because when we refer to the multilateralism and what works or doesn't work, and where we can be more impactful, let's say I'm giving you the example of our members in Venezuela. I think that they appreciate very much the work that the IOE has done also to protect and preserve them in very difficult circumstances. I give you another example of Nicaragua. The Employers and Business Organization in Nicaragua, it's dismantled. Even some of the leaders were in prison for years. And now all the members, all the leadership is outside the country, as many other politicians, I have to say also. I would have liked the UN system and the ILO to have more teeth to avoid that situation, isn't it? And it happens to you. And sometimes it's very difficult.
In Venezuela, Roberto, you know that also trade unionists are in jail. They have been in jail they have been in jail. In Belarus, they are still in jail today. So we need to be clear on that point, whether it's a company leader or whether it's a worker, that this is not acceptable. That's a standard. There is no way how you can compromise on that standard, how you can not take the same standard for whether it's an employer organization or whether it's an employer or whether it's a worker. So there needs to be a clear stand on that. Otherwise, you're not credible.
Exactly. And that also leads to another point which is important for the multilateralism. Now that we are discussing the playing level field, not playing level thing, remember when what so-called the globalization started during the 80s, and we came with I think it was a very good initiative that came also in the ILO, but I have to say that we play a role as business. It's called the Fundamental Principles and Rights at Work. This is called the 1998 Declaration of the ILO. But basically, this declaration sets like a kind of minimum that everyone has to fulfill, even if they don't have ratified the basic conventions of ILO. Forced labor, child labor, freedom of association, collective bargaining, and now health and safety. Those are the basics. How we can work together so that it's much more anchored in the... And also, how can you help us also to create a business environment also that leads also to more decent work?
Well, it's clear that we fully support the fundamental principles and rights at work. They are the core and the standard that need to be accepted by countries. So I don't see any opposition there or any different opinion between us and you on this topic, honestly.
No, but that's there, okay? But there's a kind of implementation gap, isn't it? I mean, in many countries. Uh, how we can be more effective on this area?
Well, I think we need to speak the same language on this topic when we are talking about, and I'm not going to mention any specific country, but during this governing body, there are cases on the agenda where it's about fundamental principles and rights at work, and certainly in regions like the Gulf region or in other parts where this is at stake. What we need to make sure is that from both sides, we ask all countries full respect of the fundamental principles and rights at work.
Okay.
And full respect of the fundamental principles and rights at work means indeed also conventions currently on OSH, but also conventions on the freedom of association for employers, for workers, and all that. And we can, again, not use double standards, whether we talk about a geopolitical giant country or a small country. Yeah. So we need to speak the same language, otherwise we lose our credibility. So what I expect from employers, and what you can also expect from us, is indeed the full support for every country that is covered by the ILO for the fundamental principles and rights at work.
You know that you can count on us on that, and we are sometimes with difficult situations internally among employers, but we are clear on that, and will continue to be clear. Any effort you can make also for us to improve the environment for business?
Well, the environment for business, Roberto, is what I said before. It's the acceptance of a rule of law. It's stability, geopolitical stability. It's having an environment which is stable today and also the same tomorrow. It's taking a stand against using tariffs as a political instrument, what we have seen now for more than a year done by the United States. That's not a stable business environment. So if you ask me to take a firm position against what happened in the last year, especially coming out of D.C., Washington, D.C., you have my full support, because this does not create a business environment for companies. I think many company leaders, and we are both also member of the Global Compact board, and we know that in one of the latest surveys, I think 87% of the companies stated we just continue our agenda on environmental challenges, on climate urgency, but we don't say it loud anymore. Only 1 or 2 still wants to speak on that. So companies are just continuing their business despite all the turbulence and all the uncertainty created for companies on this topic, on this specific topic. So I think what we want to say as trade unions is we have to go back to a kind of environment where there is stability, where there is certainty, where there is respect for rule of law, where tariffs are not used for political reasons, etc. Because that's bad for companies, and that's bad for workers and for people. And we see that everywhere today. There is a lot of uncertainty, and I think a lot of companies are hoping that the storm that is there since January last year will maybe slow down a little bit in the next months, and that the wars can stop. Wars without any purpose. Who can explain me the purpose and the objective of the war today in the Gulf region? So all that is creating so much instability, and we all suffer on that.
I agree that this instability is far away from being good for business. That's clear. And we feel that on a daily manner. Perhaps the area where we have to work more is how we can push further for these basics that have to do also with the essential fundamental elements in terms of fundamental principles and right at work. Because I think that doing it together makes a difference. And we are already working in many countries, by the way. I mean, in some countries where we have issues, and we are not going to mention here anyone, but working at the global level together, I think it makes a difference in terms of pushing the policies, in terms of wages, but also in terms of, basic freedoms, okay? But the area where we need to work more, and I know that that's somehow challenging, is we firmly believe that some of these regulations are not up to the expectations, of policies. They are very burdensome. They are not thinking. They are not realistic, and that's where, in an ideal world, and I know it's not easy, we would like also to see the trade union movement also with us. Okay, I'm not asking it to do it now, but
I will not do it now.
In the middle term, that would be helpful. That would be helpful because
I know what we are. I know what you are talking about. We are both, with our background, European, pay transparency, due diligence, all that. I know the topic. So let me say that I do not immediately agree with you that we need to be your partner in attacking these legislations because we have asked for them. At least my European colleagues have asked for them. That's not going to come out of me today here in this meeting, because I see also companies, and I'm going not to mention a company name now, that it has used, for instance, the Pay Transparency Directive and the Pay Transparency Reporting, not only in a European context, but they said that's what we needed for the global company. So they are implementing at global level. So I would say it's certainly something where I see issues for SMEs, where I see issues for multinational companies, because the capacity to deal with all that is maybe different. I take note of that point. I see that point. But overall, in a globalized economy of today, which is very transparent, where we all know what's happening in the world today, I don't want to be a CEO of a company that is then faced with public reporting by media or by NGOs on violations, on child labor, on unsafe working conditions, with indeed fatal accidents, etc. I think no company wants to be faced with that. So in that sense, there is a responsibility when it's about due diligence, and I don't want to go into the details of that specific point. And that also includes some reporting. But I take note, and I heard the message of the employers in the last months and year very well on the fact that they think that there is too much administrative burden, there is too much reporting, etc. And we had that debate also, Roberto, in the Global Compact, remember, where we said, okay, there is so many different reporting requirements, maybe we should bring that a little bit together. I told you.
But they're not thinking about the big players, and of course, I mean, also, let me be clear. We are very clear in our engagement with the due diligence, and it's not just because if there are regulations, it's because that comes from business. I mean, when you are handling a supply chain, you need to do your due diligence because of main reasons, reputational, ethical, etc. So that's out of question.
Yeah,
and of course, you can see some of the regulations, whether that European regulations or not, that were up to the expectations or not. I'm talking also about these developing economies and small and medium companies there. Some of the regulations are not implementable because they are crazy. Sorry, I mean, that's how and I can give you examples, and I don't want to mention countries, where they were too much or too far away. Okay, and you can say, well, we need the rule of law. We need rule of law, but we need also realistic policies and realistic regulations. I know that that's a sensitive topic also for the trade union movement, because sometimes you feel like what happens is that there is no institutions, there is no, but there is a conversation that we need. I think that we need to land there in some way, isn't it?
But the point that I want to make actually, Roberto, is if I'm the CEO of a company and I need a lot of manual labor. And I decide to go to countries in Southeast Asia, Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, Thailand, whatever, or Bangladesh. Yeah, okay, then I know that a number of these countries are maybe not strong enough to implement strong legislation on labor conditions, on health and safety. So when I decide to invest there, I know that I go to a state which I call, for certain fields, a failed state, where there is no delivery by the government on this. So then I cannot say, if something happens in my companies, that I'm not responsible because the country didn't do the labor inspection. No, when I decide to go there as a company leader, then I'm indeed responsible for a firm due diligence on what's happening in these companies, what's happening in my supply chain, and under which conditions workers have to work there. Because indeed, if something happens, there is reputational risk for my company, for my brand. and then I will be made accountable by the public and by the press and by NGOs for what's happening there. Then I cannot say, yeah, but the country didn't do the labor inspections. It's not my...
And by the market. Not only that, and by the market and investors very often.
So when you go to these countries, and we need to invest in all countries in the world, but we also then need to recognize our responsibility as a company and so on. And that's where, we have had examples in the past on that. So in that sense, due diligence becomes more and more important for companies because of the reputational risk. And I know that also with you, we had this discussion already. The question is, what is balanced?
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. Where is the balance?
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, this is not a magic formula. Due diligence is, first of all, a practice that is very much consolidated in many companies, but it's also an expectation that is growing. So I think that... But again, Luke, thank you very much for being here. I think that we have had a very... I'm not sure that that we solve all the problems that we need to solve. And I'm not sure either that we just focus on multilateralism, but I think it has been worth also to have this exchange with you, and more than willing also to engage further and to see how we can have an impact in the near future. Thank you very much,
Roberto, for the invitation, and thank you, IOE. And let's continue the good cooperation together further. Thank you.